I know I'm a week late. I know it's been a minute, so I just want to get into it. Welcome to Adam is Chase Podcast, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. How are ya? How's everything? How's life? What's the situation? What's going down? What did you think of the Acolyte? Here's the thing too, right? The discussion that's been having about the Acolyte, whether or not you are a staunch enjoyer of it or a supreme hater of it, what matters is developing a engaging and good story. And story is a little when it comes to story, it's a little bit subjective, right? And I'm not here to bash the Star Wars community, and I'm certainly not here to say that everything that Disney has been putting out for the last 10 years of Star Wars have been phenomenal. There's been a few projects that have been good, and there's like good moments in many of these projects. Do they all work? I don't know. It's a hit or miss, and what I wish more than anything is for people to fucking stop yelling at each other, because I thought about this for a week. Like, I truly thought about this show for a week, and not in a good way, but more in a audience response way. And what I hate to see the most is seeing an online discussion just go so fucking haywire that makes people either disinterested in Star Wars or very interested in Star Wars due to the amount of people who hate on a show like The Acolyte. My 2 cents with the show is that it's eh. Which is, I know, not a review, but it's like, I realize that I think I've gotten to the point where I think Star Wars is moving into a direction that I wouldn't necessarily move it into. Does that mean that, you should hate Star Wars? Of course not. If you are enjoying it, enjoy it, Like, I'm stoked when people like the series and enjoy what everything has to offer, because I don't know. Like, I feel like we could do with more, happy-spirited Star Wars fans. All these things I wouldn't say are valid, but they are what they say nonetheless, And that's just kind of, I mean, unless that is the intent of Disney, I wouldn't necessarily do that. Especially too that, like, as I was doing a little bit of research, I found that, like, Leslie Headland, who's a creator of The Acolyte, have really, like, done her homework in terms of, like, looking at the legends and, maybe exploring the video games, maybe exploring the comic books, which is all the things that I've grown up watching. The only problem is that I see where she's going, but it's not necessarily reflective on the show. And I feel like the show is trying to go into one direction, but sort of forgot that it's a Star Wars show and didn't necessarily, like, either adapt to what it wants to do, like the story that it wants to tell, or just, like, only cater to the fans and make sure that, like, you hit every nostalgia point, and make sure that this is like a nostalgia festival. And I'm glad that it didn't go that route. But what I'm still confused by is the overall story of the show. At least with the first season, right? This isn't in any way like a bash, but it's just more of an exploration. And I feel like just talking about it sort of, I don't know, it helps me sort of shape some sort of like stream of consciousness that I'm trying to muster as best as I possibly can, because it's a lot, right? And Star Wars is full, like thousands of years worth of content, spread across comics and movies and video games and what have you, animated shows. I feel like Star Wars has only... I mean, Star Wars has definitely changed, but I mean, if you ask me, like, has it changed for the better or for the worse? I don't know if it really is either one of those. It's just become different. And I want to talk about this show in a way that isn't about, like, what all the Star Wars lore is. Star Wars Theory has done that, and he's done a fairly good job. I feel like he's a little too angry, but he's not the only one. There's so many other people who are very, very angry with this. And understandably, they wanted something, in the last 10 years, something to really strike gold. Despite the fact that we've already had a few things that are gold between Rogue One, the Andor show, as much as people want to like clown on, Obi-Wan, I feel like there were good nuggets of Obi-Wan Kenobi show that were solid, but overall, of course, it felt meh, like how the Acolyte is. And that's the thing. It's like, I don't know if it's just me, but narratively, it's hard for me to keep track of some of these shows because it just feels like, unlike Andor, it feels like the show doesn't necessarily have like a motive or a core like central idea or not necessarily a message, because I could take her to leave it with a message, but like a core structure, an idea, a common motif, if you will, or just a motif in general. This idea that there's this whole entire story that is revolved around one central idea, and I felt like that central idea with this show is a little lost. I feel like a lot of these themes and a lot of these ideas kind of just get like swirled into the mixture of this show, while I feel like the show is trying to figure out what narratively it's trying to convey. And so far, it didn't feel like it conveyed a lot. It just conveyed a little more confusion than anything, right? So let's just break it down. And I was going to talk about other shows that I've watched, but I feel like now that I'm thinking about it, I just feel like talking about the Acolyte is just going to be what this pod is going to be about. I'm going to do more episodes for sure. I miss doing this shit. I like talking in front of a camera. Regardless if I have, 5 views, 10 views, 500 views, it doesn't matter. I just want to talk about this. I feel like it's fun, and it's like my little corner of the internet to just like, say what I want to say and just feel how I want to feel without feeling like I have to go with a certain point of view or perspective in a crowd. I just want to talk about it. Overall, I do think that the show has the show had a lot of potential. I do feel like narratively it kind of lost itself in a way, and I don't necessarily know where to pinpoint that. You know what I mean? It's kind of a lot, and I didn't bother to go back to watch the show, although it is like something that's in the back of my mind, because I don't know if I enjoyed it that much to watch it again, because it was just one of those things where I felt like with Book of Boba Fett or with season 3 of Mando, I was like, okay, that's a thing, I guess. All right, let's just move on, And then after the last episode, it kind of just stuck in my brain, and I couldn't help but to think, like, should we be rooting for the Jedi? Although it felt like the Jedi didn't really do much other than just be like kind of dopey, sort of like, you know, like what a child's depiction of like a stupid like cop would be, you know. And again, this is not to say that this is not to discredit Leslie Headland as a writer. I mean, she has written and directed far more great shit than I could have ever, you know. But at the same time, it's like I can't help but to hone in and focus on these things that I don't know if it bothers me, but it sends a lot of questions my way, and I can't help but to just ask them. So, okay, so let's just get started, shall we? Okay, The Acolyte is not a perfect show, far from it. I don't think that the show is necessarily horrible. Do I think it's the worst show of any show, you know, on the platform or any other streamer? I mean, not really. I feel like there are way worse shows. Certainly on Disney Plus and certainly in Star Wars, there are worse shows than The Acolyte, for sure. I just don't think that narratively it works because there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of characters to cover in a story like this, which is a lot. It's hard to keep up sometimes, but for the most part, it felt like, if you ask me what the motives are between the twins, like, you know, Osha and May, you know, who inevitably kind of become, I guess, one person, but split into two consciousness. I mean, you know, I don't really buy that because it feels like they are two completely different people. And I feel like they have their own motives. At least May did, right? In the beginning, her motive was, I want to destroy all of the Jedi who had, you know, killed my family, essentially, which is an understandable undertaking for somebody to go through. And the twin, Osha, essentially is trying to reconnect with her sister after 16 years of what she assumed to be dead, but then found alive, you know. And it felt like even those moments when the sisters reconnected, it did not feel like it was satisfying. Like, it didn't feel like it was because earned is I guess it was earned, but it didn't feel satisfying whatsoever when they first got back together on what was it, on Kofar, on the Wookiee planet, which, you know, I felt like was a complete wasted opportunity to really show that these sisters have lost each other and they lost their way, but finding each other again sort of like was the first big step into rekindling their relationship, you know. And even with the flashbacks, I feel like with the flashbacks, it didn't do any justice for the twins, because I felt like the flashbacks were really made for the Jedi and not for the twins, because the Jedi were the ones who inevitably killed the entire Coven, which is why, like, this whole entire mystery unfolded. But the problem is that, like, the Jedi who were part of this, I don't necessarily really thought that they got a fair shake in any of it at all. Like, for example, Torben, right? Torben was a young Jedi who just wanted, I guess, to go home. Essentially, that was like his whole fucking thing. And when Saul, big boy Saul, came forward, who, took in Osha and trained her until, he couldn't, and she was far too angry and far too removed from focusing and honing in on the Force for good. She was sort of removed, but with Torben, this kid kind of, he sort of threw the entire fucking operation when he found out that the twins were part of a vergence that was happening on that planet, on Brendok, where they're from. And so the Jedi, including Torben, was like, oh, well, if we discover this convergence or vergence and we bring in the twins, well, then we can go home. Only to realize that he kind of just waltzed into a lion's den without thinking, and essentially got all of them killed, I guess. And it felt like, too, 16 years later, that Torben, who's just floating, in stasis for 10 years in meditating, it felt like his death was unfair in a way. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like there was a justification, because, he drank the poison after 10 years of meditating. Osha, May breaks in and demands that Torben drinks his poison as a resolve for his misgivings, I guess, with rushing the Coven to essentially grab proof, whatever that could be, to show to the Jedi and go home and shit. I felt like that was not necessarily justifiable, and there's no reason for that character to really off themselves, because there was no reason to do that. There was just no fucking reason. It was just he was given the poison. It was like, man, I really feel bad. I wish I could be forgiven. I hope I am forgiven. So here goes nothing. Glug glug, and then he's gone. And it didn't feel right. it felt like the character was sort of wasted, when we could have probably had a little more development and have a little bit more of an understanding with that character, so that, when that situation arised, we can see the justification, go, oh, okay, well, I guess that makes sense, right? Or however heinous the crime he committed. But the only crime he committed was that he just rushed the Coven just so he can go home, I guess. So it felt a little lost. It felt like there was not really much to go from with Torben, in terms of May getting rid of all of the Jedi who were part of this whole ordeal. And the next is my girl Indara. Okay, she was the first kill. She was the first one, Jedi Master Trinity, as I like to call her. Queen Carrie-Anne Moss. She killed it, but the problem was, again, it was the same thing, and I'm gonna probably repeat myself with this, because I want to talk it through and see why it felt as empty as it did with this entire show. And it felt like Indara, it was one of those reasons that felt like it was unjustified. It didn't feel like Indara deserved to die. It didn't feel like there was any justification. Whereas Saul, sure, in I guess zooming out, Saul would probably be the only one out of the entire Jedi to essentially meet his demise. So I just felt like, but even then though, and we're gonna get to Saul, but even then though, it didn't feel justified. Anyways, Indara, first one to be killed. And the only reason why she was is because she, I guess, simultaneously killed all of the witches in that coven who, who were under, who were put into a spell under Kelnaka, which, by the way, Kelnaka, what a Jedi that got the shit end of the stick. That's Kelnaka's like downfall was completely, Jesus Christ, that was unjustified as well. Like, there were so many things, there were so many like ways in which that it felt like the show was trying really hard to make sure that we don't like the Jedi. Meanwhile, showing us that, like, well, not only Jedi, like, yeah, they messed up, but Saul really messed up, right? And they kind of, I don't know, they kind of painted the Jedi to be like these, like, really, inept, dumb cops in a way. And I didn't quite understand why they would go that route. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. So anyways, Indara gets killed, first kill. And this was like 5 minutes into the show that Indara was murked. And so I'm like, okay, that's a choice. She did something that was horribly wrong. There's no reason for a Jedi like her to be killed. And also, like, killing a Jedi is not like any small feat. It is like a huge fucking deal, a big fucking deal that will garner the attention of not only the entire Jedi Order, but the fucking Senate, the Republic. Everybody, like, at a certain point, everybody is going to know. They're going to hear rumblings and shit, right? So moving on. From Indara, we get Kelnaka, the one Jedi that I felt like has gotten the biggest shit out of the stick ever. So Kelnaka, this Wookiee Jedi Master who, was just minding their own fucking business, just wanting to do some research into finding the vergence of the planet on Brendok, where the twins are and such. And it wasn't until Saul discovered the twins that's when, this whole entire fucking thing fell apart. So Kelnaka, when Saul finds the twins, Kelnaka was just minding their own business and then gets their mind completely warped, or I guess mind jacked, right? Controlled by the Coven of Witches, who used Kelnaka to try and kill the other Jedi. Of course, it didn't work, and Indara was the one at the last minute to come in and save Kelnaka. Kelnaka, was knocked out, and the entire Coven was killed simultaneously, which was like clearly more than a dozen of witches that were just murked right then and there by Indara, which I guess, shows how powerful she can be. But again, it's like one of those things where it's like they took a situation that could have easily been avoidable and easily been controlled, and the Jedi knew better to control the situation, but inevitably didn't do that. So they were like, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and kill the entire fucking Coven because fuck it, Despite the fact that, May started a fire that spontaneously combusted an entire Coven that was built in a mountain, which is insane. How fast a mountain can catch on fire like that. That is, in my opinion, really fucking wild. But it's neither here nor there, right? It's just like, okay, if this is a way to further the plot, fine. The only problem is that, like, it just only showed that, like, yeah, the Jedi were just, like, a bunch of, like, oafs who didn't, like, understand to just, like, use distance and also mind their own business. Because, like, the whole entire idea of the Jedi, at least in my opinion, is like if any of y'all have seen Hotel Rwanda, amazing film. But basically Nick Nolte's character, where he talks about he's a peacekeeper, not a peacemaker. And I felt like that is exactly who the Jedi are, especially during the prequels. Because, like, in the prequels, like, it felt like the Jedi were just oblivious. They just didn't quite understand how or why or, like how they can wrap their mind around, like, a Sith being amongst, the Jedi. There's somebody who is gonna tear us all down, and Yoda felt something, but you can't just confirm something is bad when it's just a feeling, and it's just like a lingering feeling. So yeah, and also too, like with all those fans who said that, like, oh, and Master Yoda didn't sense any of the Jedi dying, didn't sense any of the, yeah, because the planet Brendok is a fucking million miles away from Coruscant. How the fuck would Yoda see that coming? There's no way he would see that coming. But also, it's like, yeah, I know he's powerful. Like, I know he senses things, right? But, like, sure, he probably would have sensed something very strange the moment that they get back, or the moment that Saul gets back, or the moment that he brings Osha in to see if she's qualified to be part of the Jedi Order, essentially. I would have liked to see all of that, but alas, we didn't. And more importantly, Yoda didn't show up at all in this season, except for the back of his head in the last frame of the final episode. So, of course, there's going to be anger between all that, but whatever. It's neither here nor there. I think that that there could have been, like, a better way of servicing the idea that the Jedi are bad, because the only real bad Jedi there was in this entire season was Saul. And Saul was only trying to do the right thing. He wasn't trying to, like, he felt this connection to Osha, which felt a little forced. It didn't really make a lot of sense. And quite frankly, it felt a little weird, because Saul was, like, watching the twins from a distance and didn't present himself at all. Like, the way that I would have envisioned the Jedi was is if, like, they do inevitably encounter the witches in the Coven, and their whole practice of the thread, and how it's different from how the Jedi use the Force, and how the Sith, use it in the polar opposite direction. They are sort of in the middle. And I didn't really have a problem with how they depicted the Force, because, well, first of all, thousands of species, thousands of planets. Of course, there's going to be some Force-wielding, like, people who practice in the dark arts. We've seen this with the Clone Wars and Mustafar. Who are they? The Night Sisters, right? The Dathomirians, who practice this sort of dark magic. And this witch coven sort of practices it in a more of a middle of the road kind of thing, right? Because Mother Anastasia explained it to her twins in the flashback episodes, where that it's not about good and evil, but how you wield it. And I felt like that kind of defined that entire witch coven. Whether or not you agreed or disagree with who they represent and who they are, there just wasn't enough information for, like, why they are there, why it's only female, why, this planet, why, or how do they come to be, And I'm sure, like, a lot of those questions would be answered with the season 2, but I don't know if there's going to be a season 2. So we just have to take with what we got, right? So I felt like Saul kind of forced himself into something that he should never have forced himself into in the first place. And none of the other Jedi kept him in check. Indara kind of, but not really. Like Indara just was like, "Hey, you're going down a dangerous path," and Saul's like, "I have this connection to Osha, not May, but Osha specifically. That he felt this like paternal instinct of trying to take care of her, and then when the moment was already too late, when Mother Anasea made the decision for Osha to just leave, despite that, she was reluctant to. The mother was, I guess, both mothers were, right? May was all on board for being a witch princess. And Osha was like, there's a whole ass fucking galaxy out there. I don't want to stick around Brendok. Fuck this shit. And so it's like, okay, so why not explain that? Like, why not already have that? And why wouldn't the Jedi approach this with patience, with humility? Because they're only taught one way of learning the Force. I would imagine that Indara would be interested, and Saul would be. I mean, I guess all of them, right? But like, they would be interested in what this coven practices, and instead they just sort of like portray themselves as cops. And I kind of understood why. Sorry, I was waiting for that burp. It was like deep in my belly, but it just felt like there's not enough time to really spend that felt like there was a justification for, at least this group of Jedi to do what they have done. And you could have easily solved this problem if they just had a meeting, like an actual meeting, not just like, we're just going to show up randomly during the twins' ascension to become princesses and to take over the coven, when the time is right. And there was plenty of time for the Jedi to explain themselves as to why they are there, and for the coven to explain themselves as to what the thread is, at least to the Jedi, right? It just did not feel like the decisions that were made by the Jedi, it didn't feel grounded, and it certainly did not feel like, with how they are, they're just rational people. And maybe, just maybe, too rational, right? To the demise of what happened in Revenge of the Sith, right? Because they weren't aware. They were oblivious. So I felt like, with a little bit of humility, the Jedi could have learned something, right? And could have taken that information, and maybe Osha willingly would have come and join the Jedi, or at least be the burden of proof to show that there's a virgins on that planet, to show to the Jedi Council, to show to all of them, like, there's this fucking crazy ass power on this planet, and we got to tap into it somehow before any other persons do, whether or not that's a Sith, or maybe the Trade Federation. I don't know, who knows. But the point is that there's no rationality with the Jedi in any context at all in this season. So you just sort of are left with like this sort of in between. I don't know, this in between stage of like, they are delusional, kind of stupid space cops, as opposed to like actually being rational and use and articulate their thoughts. And there's a way to write that to show that the Jedi made these mistakes and have done so in a irresponsible way. There's a way to do that, and a way to show that not all Jedi really think this way, or at least like not all Jedi feel like they are above the law in any way, shape, or form. And clearly they are, like a lot of cops feel. and a lot of cops do, to show their authoritative hammer, because at the end of the day, they're the ones with the weapons, and us civilians are, we can't defend ourselves, and if we even try to defend ourselves, we could be held liable to, a whole number of crimes that we could be charged for. So that being said, I feel like the intention was there, but it just wasn't executed in a way that I would have saw it coming. And maybe that is on purpose. Maybe that is the reason, like, why, the show is loved by a lot of people. I don't know. And I'm curious if you guys do love the show. Like, no hate, no animosity, nothing. I want to have like a good, serious discussion about this without, screaming at each other, because there's plenty of that in the last week or so, just in politics alone. Just feels like it's a lot. It's too much sometimes. Especially with The Boys season 4. Good God, I'm gonna talk about that in another episode. Anyways, getting back to Acolyte. So, moving on with the season, I wrote some notes down here, because it was definitely like I had so many thoughts, and I can only articulate it in so many bullet points that I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, there's so much happening, but yet not a lot was happening. And so Osha and May, right? The twins that were there was like a whole meditation that the twins have said. It was like a rhyme. It was like the power of one and the power of two, like that idea is interesting, but like, when you say that, like, oh, they were born as one, but separated into two bodies with different consciousness or sharing the same consciousness, but then that wouldn't make any sense, because, like, if that were the case, Osha would definitely know that May is alive, right? If they shared that consciousness. So if you were going to do that, you would have to, like, rearrange all of, like, the plot points and the key developments with those characters. And I felt like it just didn't fucking hit. It just didn't hit. And you would imagine that, like, by episode 3 or episode 4, I think it was episode 4. Episode 4, where, like, when they finally, like, get together again, the twins, for the first time after 16 years, they embrace each other. But then Osha felt like, oh, no, this is the right thing to do by taking May in. Despite the fact that May, finding out that her sister's alive, then all of a sudden completely 180'd and goes, okay, you know what? I'm going to turn myself into the Jedi. When she was already being trained by Qimir, the stranger, to essentially, like, train her into the dark side, being the Acolyte, right? Wrong. She changed her mind. She was like, well, I found out my sister's alive, and all this shit has changed. And so Qimir is like, okay, I'm going to reveal myself to be the Sith, and I'm going to kill everybody on this fucking planet. Okay. So we get to that point, and only for that to turn into Osha and May switching clothes, I guess switching roles, and show that, like, Osha was misled, and that's the reason why she became evil, and May sort of kind of, I don't know, I guess redeemed herself in a way that shows that she still has humanity and she still has love, like a lot of love for her sister. It's just she went about it in such a headstrong, reactionary way that only costed May even more, and Osha, right? And it just didn't feel like it just didn't feel grounded in a way that made me feel like them kind of crossing paths, from the beginning of the show or the beginning of the season to be one direction, only for them by the end of the season to be in total opposite directions, which could have been executed phenomenally, but it just didn't feel earned. It didn't feel like there was a payoff to it. Along with the Jedi, along with, some of those characters and whatnot, right? So then, I feel like there was plenty of opportunity to lead into the Jedi being as, like, to express the show in a way that makes the Jedi look like they are complicit with some of the things that have happened that they want to bury. And they don't want to show in the light of day. And I feel like, there's a way to do that, but then also, I don't know, it felt like they did it in such an ass backwards way that shows that, like, at least this particular group of Jedi were just so fucking stupid that they just led by a reactionary feeling and a reactionary way between all of the Jedi, from Torben to Saul to Indara to all of them, and react in a way that doesn't feel at all like what a Jedi would do. You know what I mean? And so, I feel like if you were going to lean into, I guess, objectifying the Jedi, well, you should have made that absolutely certain from the tip top of the season, especially when Havencourt came into the show, a senator who basically calls out Jedi Master Venestra, who was the one who kind of spearheaded the investigation as to, like, why, like, these Jedi are kind of, like, dropping like flies, and dispatched Saul to find, Osha, and find, May as well, and just, only for him to kind of move into a completely different direction, against the wishes of the Jedi, which I guess earned his death. But you kind of knew it was coming. Like, it was hard to not see that. And so his death was, predictable, but it was sort of like uninteresting, and it didn't feel like, again, it didn't feel like there was a lot of payoff. There's a lot, like, that's the thing with the show. I feel like the show, like, had so much setup, but none of the payoff at all. And I know, like, a defense to that is, well, it's only the first season, idiot. Like, there's, of course, not going to be much payoff. Although, yeah, there can be. I mean, you had a whole last season to at least show what the proper motives are between all these characters, and show what they want, including Qimir, because it definitely felt like even Qimir, who trained May, or was training May, then switched to Osha. It just didn't feel like there was any proper motives. And then, oh boy, at the end of this season, they showed for like a brief second, just creeping behind a rock wall. There's fucking Darth Plagueis. Like the guy who, achieved immortality, with the Force, and having the power to create death, but also create life. And that's a powerful fucking thing to have. And if any of y'all have read the James Luceno book, Darth Plagueis, highly recommend it. And in fact, I feel like I want to reread that book, because it's been years since I've read I think it's been like, it's been like almost like 15 years since I read that book. I should probably read it again. But it definitely shows like how Plagueis achieved that state of immortality in chase after the bug of power, which is, you know, where Anakin kind of fell into that trap, right? So I just felt like, you know, there was like that just felt like I don't know, like a shoehorned way of showing like, hey, see, look, there's a Dark Lord, and you may not know who this is, but this is a big baddie, and we never see Plagueis again. You know, it was just that one shot, creeping, you know, just looking from a distance, and that's like been. It's also like another motif with the show. It's just like, what's up with all like the lurkers? There's just people just lurking, just people just kind of like watching, eavesdropping, you know, like with Saul with the twins, you know, and Plagueis, and you know, even May and Osha in a few points. It just felt like you're not really doing anything unless there is a intention with it, and there was just not really any of that, you know? So yeah, it just like the show really like lent itself to being something that was like pretty special, and it didn't do any of that. It just didn't do any of that, and they were like so many moments that just felt like it was so unnecessary, and it was hard for me to really like stay focused and be captured in that show. But yet, you know, I've opened up Twitter, I've opened up Instagram, I've opened up, you know, a lot of social media, and saw, you know, across all these platforms of like how people defend the show, but I didn't necessarily see as to like what they liked about the show. And a few people had the same take I did, where it was like, yeah, the show was okay. There was moments that were good, like the fight sequences were great, the set designs were phenomenal, cinematography even was great, you know. And I love the use of keeping the camera like either on a dolly or on sticks, like on a tripod, and really let the action kind of speak for itself, rather than like the camera, like what happened in Kenobi, you know, like the first fight with between Obi-Wan and Vader. There was just so much like so much steady cam shit. Like the camera was shaking. It was hard to just like really keep up with it because it was just so frenetic in terms of like the camera. And it did not do its justice as to like let the camera just be where it is and let the action just fucking just guide the entire narrative, you know? And the show did a fair amount of that. I will give credit to the Acolyte for showing a fair amount of like, you know, emotion and passion when it came to those fight scenes, because I felt like it was done really well. It's just the story and the dialogue just felt a little empty. And not a little, it felt really empty. And I just didn't think that like they really had a clear grasp onto like, this is the show, this is where we want to have it, and the dialogue is, you know, because ultimately like the dialogue felt like it was written for an animated series rather than actually written for a dark show. Because I mean, yeah, you can say that, well, it was kind of painted more towards like, you know, younger adults, teens, you know, which is fine, but like I'm sure teens and younger adults can understand like really good dialogue, and I felt like the dialogue kind of undermined the intention and the motives and the payoffs of all of these characters, because it felt like they were just repeating themselves all the fucking time, and they didn't really show any new information. And when they did do like newer like information. It was just kind of like silly information, you know. The one example I can think of off the top of my head that felt like it was so fucking silly was Master Venestra's. Master Venestra has like a, I guess like a stomach ache, or like she gets queasy over hyperspace, which is like, I mean, okay, you know, but like, is that like necessary? Not really, but whatever. You know, and if it felt like it was necessary by the showrunner and all the writers, well then show it. Don't just say it. You know, don't just be like, oh well, Master, don't you get queasy over hyperspace? And then she was like, oh, I get a headache. Shut up. You know, and then just move on. It's like, okay, you know, it just didn't feel like there was any like they humbled the Jedi, but not in a way that felt like, oh, okay, well there's like, you know, there's a reason for this. It didn't feel like that at all. So yeah, I mean, you know, and then Qimir, the Dark Lord, I guess, or the Sith, you know, a Sith. It just, I don't know, like his power too just felt like it was like so convenient. Like episode 8 with the mind wipe, you know, wiping May's mind so that when she inevitably gets caught by the Jedi, she wouldn't have any recollection of of Osha, and wouldn't really have like an alibi other than that, like, I'm just existing, I'm just here, I don't know what happened, I don't remember what happened. Only to then, you know, like get Osha in a scene with Master Venestra with her memory wiped, and Venestra had to explain to May what happened, essentially, in her youth. And then what happened afterwards, 16 years after. You know, it just, again, it just felt like it was repeating itself, and it didn't really do any justice and show any, like, real consequences. Because there really was none. And there's not even a consequence for Qimir. There's none of that. And I understand, like, the show isn't like just about Qimir, right? But at the same time, it's like, well, he's kind of like the linchpin as to like why the Jedi were kind of dropping like flies, you know? And there was really no motive for him to be there either. Was he in any of the flashbacks? No. You know, so what's his intent other than like, he just wants a pupil and he just wants to do the Dark Lord shit his way, and that's it. You know, all the while, you know, Darth Plagueis is kind of like lurking in the shadows, just kind of like watching everybody. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I could have more thoughts on this, but like, this is as far as like I've kind of seen it, and like the intent for the showrunners to essentially make this like Rashomon style, like, you know, perspective journal, essentially, to show that, like, you know, it's not just one perspective that you would see, it would be multiple perspectives. But the problem is that all those perspectives kind of said the same thing and arrived to the same conclusion, only to kind of switch up their shit moments before like reality hits. Between Osha's decision and May's decision, you know, to switch roles, and then Saul's decision to keep May under lock and key and explain why he did what he did, although it didn't really do anything other than just let May get away, and very easily too, by the way, and just, you know, just kind of do her own thing, as silly as it felt like the Jedi were just, again, like, just like kind of like oafs to just like make mistakes every single fucking time. So I don't know. It felt like the show could have done so much better when you have the Senator Havencourt. I can't remember their name. He, essentially like drops that like, truth bomb in the first episode. And instead, like in episode 8, like what he said was exactly what I wanted the show to be, which was like, you people are just nothing but a brainwashing, power hungry cult that goes unchecked, through time, and basically does things that are above the law, and that never really used any real democracy between any of that. They just kind of made their own decisions, their own intentions, without really convening or seeking guidance from the council or for any Jedi for that matter. So yeah, it just felt like, between all the characters and the plot points, it just felt like it was hollow, and there wasn't really much for us to really grasp onto, other than the fact that, like, you can't trust one person's perspective. Although it didn't really do that justice, because it just felt like, all the different perspectives just sort of repeated the same shit and not really give us any additional insight or really show any reveals that we miss maybe from the past perspective or like a different perspective, which is the whole reason why Rashomon existed, was because like they kind of piecemealed all of these stories that culminated to the end of what happened, essentially. Great movie, by the way. Phenomenal movie. I loved it. One of my favorite Akira Kurosawa films. And it felt like it didn't really do that, and it just still remained hollow. It still remained like there's no real payoff. There's no real reward to it at all. And not that like, every single show or every single movie has to have like its little treats and rewards, because that's why one of my favorite movies, Empire Strikes Back, they didn't win in the end. They lost. They lost like significant. I mean, like fucking Luke like got his arm chopped off. The Empire is still at large, and their dominance of control is getting bigger and bigger. Like Empire didn't really have like a satisfying ending, although the characters, especially Luke, really showed the journey as to like, well, it's to show that like his journey is not yet over, because there's still a lot to do, and there's a ton to learn, because he didn't fully learn everything. I mean, Yoda was not in any way finished with Luke's training, because he just felt that like, oh, Leia's in danger. I gotta help her. I gotta go to Bespin and fucking help her. So then he just fucks off and just leaves Dagobah, and Yoda's like, dumb boy. He'll learn, So it didn't really have any of that payoff or any of that like, sort of reveal or consequences that these characters had to like go through. Like I said, it didn't feel like there was any real consequences. So anyways, just like the show, I feel like I'm repeating myself. So I'm going to leave it at that. What did you guys think of The Acolyte? I felt like, it was left to be desired. It felt a little hollow, and there wasn't really much for us to really gleam off of, especially get hyped for season 2. Although I've seen a lot of people are hyped for season 2. They really love the show. I still have yet to understand why. I'm sure if I dig even deeper, I'm sure I can find something. But like, yeah, I'm curious as to like what everyone thought, as now like, we're over a week since the last episode. I'm sure people can really gather their thoughts as to like what made the show very special to them. And I'm glad that if it's special to you, that's great. It's just, it's just one of those things where I felt like, okay, if this is where Disney's Star Wars is gonna go, then maybe, you know, like I was kind of left at the station while the train of Star Wars just kept fucking hurling down the track, you know, and I'm still at the station just wondering, are we gonna get like, you know, fucking like legends into the mix of it all? And yeah, while there's some that are mixed into it, you know, it felt like there's really not much to get hyped for, you know. I mean, even with Mandalorian, it felt like it kind of lost its spark. It lost its like gravitas that made Star Wars as special as it always has been, including the prequels. And I've said this before, but like I felt like the sequel trilogy made me appreciate the prequels 1,000 times more, because at first I was like, the prequels just felt like it was boring, and it didn't really like land itself in a way that, you know, captured my imagination like the original trilogy did. But it most certainly has, you know, watching the prequels again. I think like the last time I watched all three of them was like 2 years ago, and I had a completely different interpretation and a newfound love for the prequels, because it was like, oh, I guess like because of how young I was when these movies came out, it was like, you know, early to mid 2000s. You know, I was like, you know, around 10 and preteen, you know. So, of course, it was hard for me to really like nail down as to like why I enjoyed it, but I definitely knew I enjoyed the original trilogy more. And another thing too, just to wrap it all up, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but I certainly feel this way, whereas like these shows and movies under the Disney banner for Star Wars, it felt like they were more so like interested in vibes rather than actually like consider what a good plot and a central idea for why we are paying attention to this show or this movie at all. And that was missing in the sequel trilogy as a whole. It's missing in The Acolyte. It was missing in Book of Boba Fett, absolutely. And I still feel like Book of Boba Fett was one of the worst. It was not good. And Book of Boba Fett had some of the most respectable like filmmakers that I look up to. You know, between Robert Rodriguez and Jon Favreau, like these are like, I grew up watching that. Like I fucking love El Mariachi. I love even Once Upon a Time in Mexico. Like I loved the Mariachi trilogy. Like I loved Desperados even. Like I enjoyed those movies. And I like Spy Kids. I didn't like the second one. But the first Spy Kids fucking went hard, dude. I love that shit. Jon Favreau with Swingers? Come on. Like, if Iron Man, are you fucking kidding me? And there's Cowboys and Aliens. That wasn't great. That wasn't fun. But, you know, Mandalorian? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, Mandalorian definitely reinvigorated that imagination, that childhood imagination that I had with Star Wars. And I was like, oh, this is why I get into this shit all the time. Andor 100% achieved that as well. Achieve that level of like, you know, understand a bit, but also like the accessibility with Andor is very different, because like anybody who's never seen a Star Wars could walk into Andor and be very interested in the story of it, because it had, of course, had nothing to do with the Skywalker saga itself. Neither does Acolyte, but Andor chases after a central idea as to like how much power can corrupt one person, and how, you know, overcoming that is the battle. And that's on the rebel side. That's on the side of like, you know, people who are the resistance against all of that, including Mon Mothma, who is part of that resistance, right? So all in all, it felt like the show lacked the satisfying, you know, satisfying end, but more importantly, it lacked a satisfying feeling of having these characters go through the consequences and achieve greatness, or at least be rewarded for it in some way, shape, or form. Whether or not you needed to have a reward or even have consequences, the intent and the execution of it all was just not there. And you can have all that and you can execute it. It's just you got to have a lot more to gleam off of. And these are like 30-minute episodes, 35-minute episodes. You just it's hard to nab all of that in a span of, without credits and without the title cards. You are looking at like a 4-hour, 4.5-hour show, essentially. It's like one big giant movie, which is not the worst thing, but at the same time, it's like, well, if you're going to pace it as a show, make it a show. Whether or not you like none of the characters of House of the Dragon or all of the characters in House of the Dragon, or whether you're team black or team green, you sort of understood the intent. You understood where these characters came from. Sure, you're already in season 2, but I would argue even as far as season 1, you sort of know, even with its time jump, like where these people are and where their headspace is at. And, making those rash, horrible, godforsaken decisions that have costed a lot of these characters and those characters suffered those consequences. It just felt like the Acolyte had all of that set up and all of that build up to be something special, very special. And it just did none of that. So no hate to the filmmakers, no hate to the creative team, no hate to any of these people. It's just this Star Wars wasn't for me. It just, at the end of the day, was not for me. And I feel like that's okay. I feel like that's all right. Does that make me lose hope on Star Wars? I said in the previous pod, no, it doesn't. I feel like Star Wars is always going to remain, to me, one of the most influential things that have got me into the film industry. Without Star Wars, I probably wouldn't even fucking be here. So I love Star Wars, from a filmmaker's perspective, but also as a fan and a huge, huge, staunch, supporter and raver about storytelling. Because storytelling is literally my bread and fucking butter. I love a good story. And I love, seeing these characters make the mistakes and suffer the consequences, or make the right decisions and triumph over victory and shit like that. Those things, in however which way you put it, in whatever order, as long as you have these characters, remain honest, it feels like, at least honest with themselves. Maybe not honest to us as the audience, but honest to the characters themselves. And it just felt like there wasn't a whole ton of that. So anyways, that's about it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I see you next time. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate it. I love you. Stay safe out there. Drink lots of water, and don't talk to strangers. Bye-bye now.